If you're looking to buy a stacked NBA 2K account with max badges and more, visit sportstmb.com. He has been in the community for years and has hundreds of reviews. Click the first link in the description to get your account today.
Before we start, 1, please drop a like, and 2, if you have not yet, please go check out my second to last video. YouTube demonetized it as soon as I put it up and then immediately remonetized it, which, if you did not know, that basically kills your video's views. So there's a good chance you missed it. And finally, 3, for those of you who are a fan of the Timberwolves My GM series on this channel, many of you have been asking me where the next episode is or when it's coming out, and I cannot tell you when it's coming out, but I will tell you where it's coming out, and that is on my second channel. I'm going to finish this series on my second channel, so go give that one a sub. It will be the second link in the description, and I'm also going to be starting up a Portland Trailblazers series on that channel as soon as I finish up the Timberwolves one. But anyways, when I first became an NBA fan, the Miami Heat Big Three were the top dogs of the NBA. The trio of LeBron, Wade, and Bosh dominated the Eastern Conference, only really seeing some resistance from the aging Celtics and the up-and-coming Indiana Pacers, who never actually came. Pause? And as we should all know, that trio won 2 championships, one very boring one versus OKC, and one in one of the best final series ever versus the San Antonio Spurs. Love them or hate them, I personally hated them at the time. You cannot deny that the Heatles were really fucking good. But then LeBron James decided to go win one for the land, which, by the way, where the hell did that phrase come from? Is Cleveland normally called the land? Am I just ignorant here? Is Cleveland so shitty that the nicest name you could give it was the land? Like, did the person who founded Cleveland show it to his parents who never quite believed in him, and they were like, well, this is land, and he just ran with that? I'm gonna get a lot of angry people from Cleveland in my comment section. Oh well. Anyways, with LeBron James leaving, the Miami Heat's title hopes for 2015 dropped to basically nothing. And the Miami Heat went through a few years of mediocrity in terms of record, but they were silently building a very solid team that just needed a star player to come around and make them a good team again. And lo and behold, Jimmy G Buckets was happy to oblige. And now 16 games into the year, the Miami Heat are 11-5, and they look like they could be a legitimate threat in the Eastern Conference. So looking at this team now versus where they were almost 6 years ago, I want to talk about how they got here. And interestingly, how they did get here without tanking. So roll the late ass intro. LeBron signs with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Heat have to immediately pick up the pieces. The first step is re-signing Chris Bosh. The Rockets really pushed for Bosh that offseason, trying to get another star next to James Harden, but luckily, just like when he originally went to the Heat, with or without LeBron James, Bosh wanted to be in Miami. He signed a 4-year, $120 million deal, but that wasn't it for the Miami Heat. They also signed Luol Deng after a brief stint in the land to a 2-year, $20 million deal. He filled in at the wing, hit some 3-pointers, played some defense, could play both forward spots. They also drafted Shabazz Napier and signed Hassan Whiteside. Unfortunately, the Miami Heat would have problems with injury this year. Dwayne Wade missed 20 games, which had pretty much became the norm at this point, and Chris Bosh ended up missing half of the season after averaging 20 points per game for the first time since 2010. But there were some bright spots. They traded for Goran Dragic, who was good for them, and the guy that they picked up for a minimum contract, Hassan Whiteside, was actually really good. He had one game in particular where he broke out against my Bulls by getting a triple-double with blocks. He averaged a double-double that season with 2.5 blocks on 63% shooting. But with those injury problems, they went 37-45 and missed out on the playoffs. But on the bright side, they did get a solid lottery pick where they were able to land Justice Winslow, a very athletic defensive-minded wing with some offensive upside, and in the second round, they drafted Josh Richardson, a raw two-guard with some potential. And in free agency, they made some small signings with Gerald Green and Tyler Johnson. In that season, they won nearly 50 games. They had Dragic for a full year, Hassan Whiteside took another step, Josh Richardson was surprising as a rookie, being a really good shooter, but unfortunately, Chris Bosh ended up having some career-ending blood clot problems. But even without Bosh, the Miami Heat were able to make it all the way to Game 7 of the second round of the playoffs, nearly making it to the conference finals to face the Cleveland Cavaliers, which would have been very awkward. They beat the Hornets in another 7-game series, and in the second round versus the Raptors, Wade put up a vintage performance for the whole series, putting up 24, 6, and 4 on 47% shooting at age 34. But going into that offseason, the best player in the history of the Miami Heat franchise was up for a new contract. Heat full-time general manager and part-time leader of the Miami crime syndicate, Pat Riley, let Wade walk to the Chicago Bulls. Thanks for that, by the way, because that wasn't a total disaster or anything. And Riley's replacement for Dwayne Wade was Dion Waiters. Yeah. This year, Winslow really disappointed. The Heat dropped to just 41 wins, and they missed the playoffs. But once again, there was a silver lining, and that was the Miami Heat drafting big man Bam Adebayo, a defensive-minded, undersized center who had drawn some Dwight Howard comparisons, who I also failed to mention in my Most Improved Player race video. I would like to formally apologize to all of Heat Nation. I love Bam Adebayo. I just forgot about him for that video, so my B. They brought in Kelly Olynyk to hit some three-pointers and intentionally injure the opposition, and they also signed Hassan Whiteside to a massive contract, which they would pretty much immediately regret, because he had a pretty noticeable drop in effort on both ends of the court. He also started taking shots like he was a star player when he wasn't, and the flaws with his defensive game were picked apart. He put up great numbers defensively, especially with blocks, but he got lost off ball, was bad defending the pick and roll, and when he got switched onto a guard, you might as well have just walked back to the other end of the floor because the opposing team was going to score. The Heat traded for Dwayne Wade mid-season. Josh Richardson had a great year, shot 38% from 3, averaged 12 points. Justice Winslow hadn't made a huge jump, but he was still an elite defender, and he shot 38% from 3 that year. Oh, and they signed Tyler Johnson to a really stupid contract. Forgot about that. They would make the playoffs this year, faced the Sixers in the first round, and lost in 5 games. And then in the offseason, once again, it was not all too eventful. As I said in the intro, this Heat team had progressed to the roster that they currently have through a lot of small moves in free agency, getting a couple of later lottery picks and picking up Josh Richardson in the second round. Nothing crazy yet, but in the 2018 offseason, to show just how uncrazy it was, they signed Duncan Robinson, and that was it. I'm not kidding. But they did have some internal improvements. Josh Richardson stepped up his scoring, averaged 16 a game, and Justice Winslow broke out a bit when he was switched to the point guard position in the absence of Goran Dragic. He averaged 12, 5, and 4, shot 37% from 3 on 4 attempts per game. For a 13-game stretch before getting hurt with the ball in his hands, he averaged 15, 6, and 5 and shot 39% from the field and 42% from 3. So he finally showed signs that would indicate that he wasn't going to be a bust like it looked like he was, and he actually turned out to be a pretty valuable piece. They also started to give Bam Adebayo more minutes as he continued to prove to be a better player than Hassan Whiteside, and then they missed the playoffs. Wade had a farewell tour, had a great last game with a triple-double, and then this offseason is where everything fell together. With Wade out, Wayne Ellington getting cut, and Dion Waiters sucking, the Heat needed a two-guard, and they decided to draft sharpshooter Tyler Hero, who immediately impressed in Summer League and quickly drew comparisons to Devin Booker. They also signed Kendrick Nunn from the G League, who was really great in the preseason, having a 40-point performance, also great in the Summer League, and they traded Hassan Whiteside to the Portland Trail Blazers for Myers Leonard, which would unleash Bam Adebayo with no one to get in his way. And obviously, most notably, they signed and traded for Jimmy Butler, giving up Josh Richardson in the process, a trade that would not have worked without Josh Richardson, so they ended up getting a star player for a second-round pick. Now, as we know, the two rookies in Hero and Nunn have been fantastic, particularly Nunn, who is currently averaging 17 points per game. Duncan Robinson, who they picked up undrafted, has been ridiculously good. He is shooting 42% from 3 on 6.5 attempts. He had a game where he hit 7 or 8 threes in the first half versus the Cavs, hit 7 versus the Nets. Bam Adebayo has been one of the most improved players in the NBA, averaging 14 points, 10 rebounds, and 4.5 assists, being used as a playmaker, as well as 1.8 steals and 1.4 blocks on 61% shooting. Dude has been fantastic. Goran Dragic has been great as the sixth man, arguably the best he's ever been for the Heat. Myers Leonard, who they got back in the Whiteside trade, has been very good, shooting 60% from the field and 60% from 3. Justice Winslow has really been the only disappointing one so far this season, shooting 38% from the field, but I expect him to turn that around. And with all of this, their star player Jimmy Butler hasn't even been that great. He hasn't had to take over games. This roster is just genuinely really well built to the point where he can afford to be just an 18 point per game scorer, and the Heat are still very good. And I should also throw some credit Eric Spoelstra's way. I probably should have done it earlier. Dude is probably the best coach in the Eastern Conference. The Heat probably wouldn't have ever been in the playoffs post LeBron without him, so yeah. And the Heat did all of this without tanking. Sure, they did miss the playoffs 2 years, but it wasn't because they tried to bottom out. They just had injuries and or sucked. And even when they missed it, they were always like the 9th or 10th seed, consistently competing for a playoff spot. They didn't try to blow it up, get high lotto picks. They stuck to what they had and got to where they are now, which is not easy to do in the NBA. The Heat are good again. That's how they did it. And that's the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.